Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another Nightmare World devlog, and more importantly, welcome to Devlog Island. A home created just for the devlogs where we can show off actual progression in a visual form, whether that be systems, assets, or just special effects things. This includes sound as well. Now, before we continue, I just want to make this very clear. Devlog Island is not a location from within the game's lore. This is purely for the devlogs. This may be repurposed at a later time for beta tests, or as a developer sort of island. But as it goes in the lore, this is not a real thing. This is here just for you guys. Now, it's been 2.5 months since our last devlog, and every single minute of every day, you guys have been asking, when's the next devlog? Has it finished? Have you quit? Is it over? Are we ever going to see another? And to answer those all in a very surmised way, we haven't given up, and in fact we have been busier than ever. Over Christmas, our team size doubled. We went from around 12 people to 20 plus now. So, before we get in to what we've actually done this month, I just want to say, everything you're seeing in engine is not final. If you look at something and it looks like it's untextured or it has an unfinished texture on it, presume that that is the case, because it most likely is. And for almost everything that is untextured in engine, we currently have the artists working hard on finishing those textures. So, what have we done this month? Well, let's start off with the technical side. This month, Canon has created an automated system for our backend to help us build a new version of every change we push as a server. Now, to most of you that won't mean anything, but I'll explain this. Every time there is a new version of our game, we have to build the server for it. And by build, I mean compile. This process is something that only a few people could previously do because of technical knowledge limitations. But now we've got it where you'll be able to run a command in the Discord as a developer and it will build a new version of the game. This is a massive help to us because it saves us a lot of time and it saves the responsibility falling solely on the web team. So, first things first. Chris put together this absolutely beautiful devlog island, and we gave him such a small amount of time, yet he's managed to absolutely smash this. It's starting to look beautiful, even though it's not going to be in the final game. Chris has also been working on the animation for the ether anchor, or vortex as we're calling it. This is a bit of a lore element. These are the things that hold together the floating islands of Nightmare World and stop them drifting too close to the core. This probably isn't its final visual. There will probably be more effects added to this, and it'll probably be refined a bit more. But it's a very good start. For myself, I've been working on a water system that's dynamic to allow for refraction below the surface, dynamic depth fading as the water gets deeper, beautiful ripples for anything that's in the water, whether that's added at runtime or added in engine. I've added prefabs, which are collections of items to randomize as ground clutter, because placing things manually is very time consuming and you can't always naturally recreate randomness while trying to think of doing something random. The brain just doesn't work that way. Now, I've also started work on some of the back-end systems for archeology, one of our skills in the game. The first thing that I've worked on is a rune system. Now, this is not how you do archeology, this is a reward for archeology. Ancient texts around the world will be visible for everybody to see. However, not everybody will be able to understand what they say. To do that, you will need an archaeology level. This archaeology level will vary per tablet, per wall writing, or per book that you see with this text. Now, as you get closer and closer to the required level to read that text, you'll actually be able to read bits of it. These bits will be random based off noise masks, and it means that you can take a pretty good guess at what it's saying or partially read sentences and put together your best estimation on what these could be about. This system will have some deeper lore hidden behind it that players with the right archaeology level can decipher and feel rewarded for actually finding out. Discovering deeper lore elements that aren't just main story is a massive reward to players, and we hope that doing this will make players feel very rewarded for efforts that they made earlier on. Imagine you're in a cave, like the one on Devlog Island. You're roaming around and you see an archaeologist, such as the archaeologist tutor, Jade. Jade tells you that she's here to decipher runes and understand about this ancient civilization. Jade knows what they say, but maybe you don't. There'll always be something ticking in the back of your mind as you're leveling archaeology that makes you wonder, what does that say? And if that curiosity is enough for you, you can go back and read these at any point. The system's still very early in development, so that's all I'm going to cover on that. So on to the next one. The sound team have done absolute wonders. Our sound team is one of the most professional sound teams I've ever seen. Their work quality is phenomenal. This month they've added sounds to footsteps, mining, and woodcutting. 3 of the main things that we've finished development on for now. Along with this, Ian, or Bearclops, is working on a dynamic music system that is layered and will change tempo, pace, and aggressiveness throughout the activities you do in that zone. Each zone will have its own one. So let's take Devlog Island, for example. Let's say we have some fairly chill background music. When you enter combat with a low-level creature, the tempo will kick up because it's now entering battle music stage. The variables that can change the pace and tempo are based on who's winning the fight. Are you winning or are you losing? Depending on that, the music will swing into a more dangerous, aggressive tempo. And yes, this is a layered track created and composed by our head of music, Ian. He has done a fantastic job on this. These variables are all controllable within blueprints to dynamically change the tempo of the song as it is playing in one entirety. We're also working on some absolute magic sauce to make sure that everybody who is listening to a song in the same area is listening to it at the same point, regardless of pitch, aggressiveness, and tempo. That's some absolute wizardry, though, and that is definitely something to be explained at another time, once we've managed to make sure that it absolutely works the way we want. Now, we can't show this in an in-game scenario right now for 2 reasons. 1, combat is not in Devlog Island yet. And secondly, the system that we're using to make this happen is meta sounds in Unreal Engine 5, which the team has been working extremely hard to make sure everything is compatible to be moved over to that very, very soon. This will also have variations based on the severity of the combat situation. Are you against a mini-boss, a world boss? Are you just fighting a fluffy bunny that can't even defend itself? Time of day and night can also be plugged into this along with our weather system, meaning the variables here can change the music up to about 15 or 20 different variations of the same music based on the situations you find yourself in. This is 1, more efficient than making many tracks for one zone, and 2, allows us to have more for specific situations. If you're running around woodcutting, we can even have a music variation for that. This also allows for us to add variations in caves, which I think is going to be really, really exciting. Now, for the next part, we're going to be talking about programming. And who better to explain this to you than the guy who's been working on these systems specifically, Daz. So we're going to get Daz to explain that for you guys. Daz?
Cal, what is it? We have a cave-in in Tunnel 6, Sound is trapped behind some rubble, and the bugs are closing in.
Can you come give a quick explanation for the devlog on what you've been doing?
Fine. Hello, everyone. I'm Jazalius, the technical lead for Nightmare World. If you remember, back in October, we started something called No, no, we're not saying that word again. Let me try again. If you remember, back in October, we started working on skills in 2-week intervals. The idea was to get the whole team working on a single skill for those 2 weeks. Then we stopped doing that almost immediately. We found that hyper-focusing on one skill like that didn't work well for all the departments. Things like art and narrative, they need a little more flexibility in what they were working on. So while the technical team will continue to do these focused development cycles, the rest of the team has the freedom to work outside of them. Now, on to what we've actually done these past few months. First thing we did was focus on setting out the basics for the survival skill. Now, one thing we need to be clear on, we're not making a survival game. For a game to count as survival, at least in my opinion, there typically needs to be some sort of vitality metrics, such as hunger, thirst, sanity, etc. Something that requires management to survive. We're not going to have that. There will be food in Nightmare World, but you won't need to manage a hunger bar. That being said, the survival skill does dip its toes into the survival genre, but it won't be necessary to engage with survival mechanics all the time. And we'll explain more about that a little later in the video. The first thing we did was get trees set up. Like with mining, you swing an axe at a tree and eventually it will fall over and give you wood. It's pretty simple. A lot of games have systems like this. After that, we moved on to setting up campfires, which we're doing a little bit differently than most other games do. Typically in other games, you'd place a fire down and then put items into the fire's inventory to start the fire. We didn't really want to do that, and if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense. Instead, when you place down a fire, you can add logs to it. The fire has a maximum duration it can burn for, and each log has a burn time and heat generation. The goal is to get the fire as hot as you can without going above the maximum duration. And once you light the fire, the logs become charred and you can't take them out again. Now, the system is still in the iteration phase, so it's likely to change quite a bit before release, but this is sort of the direction we're looking to take it. It adds a level of complexity to fire while still keeping it simple enough for most players. Now, last devlog we discussed the weather system, and this time we've expanded it. They now apply temperature effects to the player, so a snowy area will make the player cold, and a desert will make the player hot. Additionally, the aforementioned fires can be used to combat cold environments. Now, we want to avoid having health-damaging environmental effects. We feel it can take the fun out of it if you get caught in a snowstorm unprepared and end up dying through no fault of your own. So, instead, cold and hot weather effects will affect things such as stamina or movement speed, amongst other player stats. Now, this does not mean the environment won't be able to harm you, just that large zones such as weather won't kill you outright. We also work to make sure that snow only collects in areas it makes sense, so you won't see snow inside your built structures or around campfires. We also did a few small improvements, such as making sure building blocks recognize when they're built into structures, and started on the basics of a dialogue system. Now, it's time for me to reveal my secret project. This has been hinted at in streams and chats and stuff, but it's finally time for me to announce to you guys what I've been working on personally. Combat. Combat is something that is really important to get right, because it can feel really bad if it's floaty or unresponsive or any number of other things. It's also a challenge to bring together what everybody wants out of the combat system into something we can all agree on. And that's why I started with a prototype. Prototyping is something that happens all the time in the game industry, and it's actually something that a lot of new developers don't really think about. You learn a lot the first time you make a system or mechanic, and you make a lot of mistakes. By building a prototype first, you can make those mistakes and then correct them when you restart to make the actual product. And that is the key part, to restart. If you copy your old code directly, you're just going to copy your mistakes along with it. After the combat prototype, I moved on to writing an in-depth document on how combat will work in Nightmare World. Now, I'm not going to explain every facet of this document today, but I am going to give you a brief overview of some of the major points. First, there are 3 types of combat: melee, ranged, and magic. Melee is obviously close quarters, hand-to-hand, in the thick of it. Ranged is all about staying at long range and pelting enemies with arrows, bolts, or even the odd musket ball. And magic is all about mid-range, bolstering your team with powerful spells. Each type of combat is tied to a skill, and leveling up in that skill will increase the gear you have available and the abilities you can use. Now I'm going to explain the core feature of the combat system: the attributes. Attribute systems are nothing new to MMOs, but we're doing something a little different than most games. Let me explain. There are a total of 8 attributes. Strength and Fortitude support melee combat. Strength affects how much damage your melee weapons deal. Fortitude affects how effective your armor is. Accuracy and Agility support ranged combat. Accuracy affects, well, accuracy. And Agility affects how fast you can aim. Willpower and Intellect support magic combat. Willpower affects your damage dealing spells, and Intellect affects your buffing and utility spells. Vitality and Endurance support all combat types, and mainly affect the health and stamina pools respectively. Now, these are just the base functions of each attribute, but each one does more and supports the other combat types just to a lesser extent. The last key point to make about attributes is you won't be able to max out all of these at one time. Each pair of attributes shares 1 XP bar. Thus, gaining in one area will lessen your ability in the other. This is to keep things balanced between players and allow for individuality from player to player. Furthermore, the game is balanced so that you don't need to max out these attributes at all in order to be good at combat. A player can go through the entire game and not gain a single experience point, and they'll still be as effective as anyone else, just because of how the attributes work. I'm not going to explain too much on that because we're still working out all the details and stuff, but that is our plan. This attribute system allows for lots of variety in character builds, and I can't wait for players to get their hands on it and test out playstyles. Last few things to touch on with combat. We're wanting this to be mostly action-oriented. To that end, each weapon will have 2 attacks. The main attack, which will stay consistent. Typically this will be a lighter, faster attack. And the secondary attack, which is determined by your stance. Stances are how you level the aforementioned attributes. I won't fully break down every stance, but I will say not every weapon will have every stance, and some weapons will have more stances than others. We'll probably talk about this a little bit more in later devlogs as we sort of flesh out the systems and stuff. And finally, we're planning abilities, which will function more like traditional MMO abilities. Each one grants you a special move you can do in combat, and every skill will have abilities to unlock, even the non-combat skills. I hope this gives you the basic idea of how combat will work. There's still a lot of work to go, and none of this is final, and I'm sure things will change as things go forwards. But this is the direction we're looking to take it. I'm looking forward to reading your feedback and answering your questions in the comments. I want to know what you guys think. Now, I've got to get back to the code mines before we have another cave-in.
Thank you, Daz, for that quick explanation. In case you haven't noticed, our dev team don't have YouTube quality microphones. For any future stuff they do, I'm going to make sure I sort them out with something. Now, with programming out of the way, let's jump in and have a look in a bit more depth at what the art team have been doing. And here to represent the art team is our lead artist, Rotsu. So, Rotsu, take the floor.
These past few months, the art team has been incredible. We've been producing all kinds of assets from moss and mushrooms to cutlery and pottery. There's nothing more beautiful than seeing a scene come together with a table made by one artist, a bowl made by another, a spoon from another artist, and delicious soup painted by one more. Our clutter keepers and foliage fondlers have been hard at work really fluffing up the world, and wow, does it show. We also had some meta assets reworked for this month. We built a lighting sublevel. It really brightened up the art style. Added a day-night cycle and a clock to keep track of it, and even completely overhauled the UI, replacing the old assets with what will likely be the first stage of our final UI layout and style. Sure, some of the menus and buttons have yet to be transferred over to the new visuals, but it's getting there, and it's definitely the right direction. Now, I want to take a bit of time to talk about the biggest task on our plate, the player model. The version of the player model that you've seen so far genuinely did have good principles behind it. Firstly, we wanted it to be intuitive for developers, and that it could be easily worked on by any artist without detailed explanation, and we definitely had that. Secondly, it had to be modifiable with free software such as Blender and Krita, since we started our project with a zero budget goal. Thirdly, it had to be constructed in puzzle piece sections so that our player customization could be paper dolled over the base model in a way that made sense and looked good. A task that's far more mental labor than most people realize, myself included. Finally, we wanted it to fit with our art style but allow for lots of different artists to freely create assets that still worked with the character design and the art style. As it happens, we made a lot of mistakes with that first version. The biggest one was the bone rigging construction. As you've probably noticed, sometimes the animations just went wild. Bones didn't always want to connect to each other and sometimes even jumped out of place. We also didn't fully grasp the function of shape keys, called morph keys in Unreal, and in converting those from Blender ran into strange issues. The most notable of all is that the player model looks far too androgynous overall, including the distinctly male and female models. This was originally going to be modifiable in shape keys that didn't make it into Unreal because of these oversights. Most importantly of all, the final touches of the first player character model were done right before a devlog, which meant it was rushed without double checking all the bells and whistles. Obviously, the key lesson we learned was don't fucking rush it. So, for the next version, we did it. Version 2 is looking and feeling so much better than version 1 due to our new philosophy. And all the problems we had before should be non-existent in this new model. The biggest difference is that we are using the exact bone and rig hierarchy of the Unreal mannequin, so absolutely none of the animation errors from our old rig should persist. Yes, that sounds like it should have been an obvious choice, but hindsight is always 20/20. We've also figured out the proper functionality of shape keys on skeletal meshes, and thanks to our friends from Rainy Day Studios, we likely have all the future issues with them out of the way. From body fat and muscle sliders to physics-based hair, the new player model is finally looking like something we can truly be proud of for some time to come. This team has been working very, very hard, and is arguably the greatest team I've ever had the privilege of leading. I'm so proud of the work everyone has done and the growth they've had as both artists and individuals in such a short time. I really see a bright future with all these beautiful people.
And there we have it, the first devlog of 2022. As you guys can see, this is a lot more filled out than the other devlogs, and that is just because of the sheer amount of time and more resources that we've poured into this. I have to say, Nightmare World is coming along very quickly now, and now that we're starting to get things in engine and visible for you guys, I'm honestly really proud to show it off to you guys. The team behind Nightmare World are some of the most passionate developers, artists, sound effects people, and back-end developers that I have ever met in the industry, and I've met a lot of people in the industry. And rightfully so, as Rotsu says, I see a very, very bright future for both the game and the team behind it. Now, we've already got next month's lot of work sorted out for all of the departments, and we're already underway on that as well. And also, a massive thank you to everybody who is supporting us and cheering us on from the sidelines. It actually means the world to me. On the topic of support, we've mentioned that at some point soon we will be opening a Patreon for those of you who want to support us a bit further and go the extra mile. While that's not happening right now, this will allow us to get better equipment for our team and also pay them for their amazing contributions to the Nightmare World project, which I think we can all agree they absolutely deserve. Now, unfortunately, that is the end of this devlog. But I can assure you from now on, devlogs will be more frequent than they were between the last two. If you guys are interested in seeing more of this, absolutely make sure to subscribe. And if you want a bigger fix of Nightmare World content right now, me and the team are going to be live over on Twitch, doing a bit more development and showing off more of Devlog Island. I can't wait to see you all over there, but until then, I'll see you in the next one.